time to get going. I'm sure a few folks will be joining us. I want to welcome everybody to the February 4th meeting of the Community Advisory Panel. I think our meeting went very well last time. We got to know each other. We changed the order a little bit based on people's preferences. So I look forward to a very good meeting tonight when we're going to talk about broadband, but first we're going to have the electric system, some background on the electric system. And I know you all have had opportunity to see some other things as well. We're not going to need to call the roll and take that time. We have obviously we can tell who is here. Everybody was emailed the minutes, I believe. Does anybody have any corrections regarding the minutes they'd like to offer? Great. Well, I guess we can get started right away. We're going to hear two presentations tonight. John Williams, the Senior Vice President of Construction, is going to give a presentation orienting us to the electric system. As we explained, that's really necessary because of the reliance on broadband and the dependence on that electric system. And then we're going to hear a broadband presentation from Jamie Davis, the Vice President of Grid Modernization. I think given the difficulty of seeing everybody at once and with the limitations of Zoom, I'd like to request that we let's have a time for questions after each of those presentations. If something really strikes you as needing clarification immediately, you could always use the chat window, and we'll see if we can make that work. But I think otherwise, if we could let John and Jamie get through the presentations and stop and deal with questions, then that would be good. And when they're done, what we will do is we have a little bit of a tool to facilitate our discussion with a few questions to guide us, and we'll just open it up for further questions and discussion among the group. And at that point, we'll then adjourn. So I'm going to turn it over now to John Williams, as I said, the Senior Vice President of Construction, and give us a presentation and an orientation to the electric system.
Thanks, Bill. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And if you all would just, Bill, give me some confidence that you all can see that okay as I go to presentation mode. Y'all good with that?
I see it. I see it, yeah.
All right, outstanding. So I want to be respectful of your all's time, and I know really the main topic of this evening's session is about municipal broadband. So I'm going to go pretty quick through this. I know you all had asked about moving some of this content to videos at our last session, and we want to be responsive to that. Just weren't able to pull all that together in time to fit it in for this session. So you'll have to put up with me instead for a little bit. But I'm going to move quickly, go about an inch deep as we go through some stuff. I'm going to start off with really just an overview of how we get power from TVA to our customers, quickly how we operate the system, and then a little about our Century 2 program as it relates to how we invest in infrastructure and the maintenance of our systems. So we'll get started if you're good with it. Real quick, just a backdrop. We love maps, so we're going to start with maps, have several maps as we go through here, but really just an overview of KUB's service territory for all four utility systems, over 468,000 customers, Knox and 7 surrounding counties. But really the purpose of discussion today is really about the electric system, and that's what we'll go through today. So a little over 210,000 electric customers in portions of 7 counties. So obviously Knox being the main portion there, but also clockwise touching on Union, Granger, Jefferson, Sevier, just a few in Blount and Anderson counties as well. Really just from a bearings perspective, north to south reaches from Norris Lake to Seymour, and east to west goes from Cedar Bluff Road to the Dollywood exit. That just kind of gives you a little bit of a framework for where our electric system is and how we serve those customers. One quick point that I think is interesting, at least it is for me, compared to some of the other larger electric systems in Tennessee, KUB's system is a bit more rural. Our service area is a little bit wider, and so we have quite a few diverse customer needs across our communities. We're happy to serve all of them, and We also have just, fundamentally less customers per mile. So as we talk about, I'll have some numbers out there about miles of wire and poles, et cetera. We just have more of those than most utilities with similar customer counts. So what I'm going to do is really walk through a kind of a pictorial view of how we deliver power from TVA, how we receive it from TVA and deliver it to our customers. But before we go through the pictures, I just kind of want to orient those who are interested geographically at where things are at. So we receive power from TVA at 9 in-feed stations. Those are located on the map with the red squares. So you can see those on the map. And then we have 63 distribution substations that we move power to that are closer to the specific areas we serve. Those are located on the map and represented by the black dots that are on there. Across that whole service area, over 5,400 miles of lines. And just to put that in perspective, similar to a drive to Seattle, Washington and back. So a lot of miles of line to maintain along the way, a lot of work there. I mentioned we get our power from TVA. They generate, supply our electricity. The picture there really kind of shows one of their hydroelectric facilities. And the picture on the right shows one of their transmission towers that they deliver power across their TVA region to local power companies like KUB. And again, they deliver those to those 9 red squares that were on the map, those in-feed stations. And just to take a closer look at those, that picture there is of our West Hills substation. It is located on Middlebrook Pike across from Red Cross, Bearden Middle School, just to kind of give you an idea of where that one's at. If we were to give a tour physically, this is where we would go because it's close by and easy to get around. As you go and look at that picture on the right-hand side, that'd be on the east side of the actual way you look at it. The power comes in from TVA and goes into that smaller square on the right-hand side of that picture where we step that power down. And then it goes into the KB side, which is the larger left-hand side of the picture. Once we get it on that side, there's really 2 things we do with it. The first thing is we transmit it across all of our service area to link up other substations, sort of a spider web effect. That's to help with reliability and resiliency. When outages occur, we can reroute power quickly. When we're doing system maintenance, we can take out certain sections and backfeed from other areas. So that's one purpose. The other purpose is to move that power to those 63 dots that are on the map on our distribution system so that we can serve those customers. And as we go through that, really, this slide just kind of shows what the linkage between the substations looks like. So on our sub-transmission system, there's 266 miles of that ties those substations together. A lot of it you'll see maybe cross-country, like the picture on the left. It could be along the roadways, like the picture in the middle. The easiest way to describe it, they're just taller poles. And they carry that. They oftentimes share space with our distribution system as well. And they ultimately deliver those 63 substations. The one on the right is our substation that serves the Luttrell area, that serves parts of Union and Granger counties. And so that's the way that we get it to the substations closer to those communities. Once it's in those substations, then we take it throughout our distribution system. And that distribution system covers over 4,000 miles of overhead line. We also have about 1,000 miles, a little bit over that, of underground cable, mostly in newer residential developments, newer commercial developments. But as we do that, you've got over 72,000 transformers that are out on the system. And what those are really just kind of localized substations to some degree. They just drop power down from the voltage that we move it around the system at down to a level that our customers can take it. So we have a very diverse service area. So the picture there on the left shows some work that we're doing in the UT area in front of a Starbucks, and behind it is Children's Hospital, Fort Sanders Regional Medical Center. So we serve things in the heart of the city, And the picture on the right is a new service extension in the northeast tip of our system. So a lot of different work and for a lot of different reasons for a lot of different customers. And so that's all we do to get that out there. Once it's at the customer level, then we take it from that transformer, which is the gray trash can looking attachment that's on that wood pole there to the left. And what that does is take it, there's a service line that then connects to the house right above that roof line. And that's where the customer receives that at their own equipment. And then we have a meter on that equipment to measure their usage, and that's what the billing is based off of. This particular installation, as well all of them do now, has KUB's new advanced meters. And that just allows us to be able to provide our customers with real-time usage information so they can view the utility usage on a daily basis. It also notifies KUB if there's any kind of service interruption or outage, so the customer doesn't have to do that. That's just one example within that meter itself of some of the evolving technology that we're working with on the electric system. So I went just kind of whirlwind speed going through the system overview of how things go from TVA to the customer. I do want to talk for just a second before we get into how we manage the system and its infrastructure, talk just about how we operate things. We have an operations center that monitors utilities 24/7, 365. The bottom right picture there shows our main operations center, where we have operators from all utilities in that room. It's really the central hub for all the work that goes on a daily basis, coordinating with the crews that are on our system that are performing work and maintenance. They're also there to serve a very critical role when system conditions are abnormal, we have outages. And they're really the central hub for those. They will work and initiate emergency response as needed, whether it's a first responder or crews, or coordinate a large response. They also work with our call center, our customer experience folks that are in the picture there on the top, to be able to make sure we provide the customers with responsive, reliable information when we have those kind of events that happen. I wish I had really more time to spend talking about all of our operations and all the things that go into that. I feel like I'm doing that some injustice here, but we do need to move on and make time. So I'll skip on past that, but don't want to underemphasize the importance of operating those systems. A lot of complex things that go on there behind the scenes. So just want to segue and switch gears to maintaining the system. But before we get into our Century 2 program, which you probably heard of, one of the videos that you got was about that. I'll cover that on the next few slides. I want to kind of give just a quick backdrop about the national infrastructure. Utilities are certainly part of that. The American Society of Civil Engineers releases an infrastructure report card every 4 years. The last one was in 2017. The next one should be coming out sometime this year. They look at all sorts of infrastructure across the nation: bridges, roads, railroads, airports, schools, utilities. And they place a grade on those after kind of looking at their condition and what's going on. The 2017 report card graded out the nation with a D+. And for those of you that remember the school days, that's not good. So, why is that? Well, it's really a function of age and time and a lack of investment. When you think about communities that built out across this country, they did so over 100 years ago. So the roads, the rail systems, all these things were put in place, and so were the utilities. Even in Knoxville, a lot of our water system assets are over 100 years old. So they've obviously got to the point where they're reaching the end of their life. And so making sure that we invest in those is critical. The American Society of Civil Engineers recommends really 3 key actions to improve this grade. The first one is to invest in replacing the infrastructure and having a sustainable long-range plan for that. The second thing they recommend is making sure that was prioritized and planned. I mentioned sustainable, but having a way in which you can continue that funding over time. And then the third is having the leadership in place to act now and sooner to be able to reverse that trend. We believe we have that. KB launched its Century 2 programs for electric, gas, and water in 2007. Wastewater was just prior to that in 2004. And really, we try to balance managing those assets just like you would your car or anything else, making sure that you can perform maintenance to extend the life of all those components, and then when they need to be replaced, do so before they fail. And so we do this in a very steady, incremental process that reflects, I think, the recommendations that they've made, but also our blueprint and how we go about things. So I think we're ahead of the curve in that. We branded it Century 2 because it is indeed the second century of serving our customers. We look at a lot of data, a lot of comprehensive assessments to make sure that we're not just replacing things and doing maintenance, but we're doing that in smart ways, and stretching those dollars as much as we can. One of the things that's important is it really does feed and blend in well with our 10-year financial plans, because what it does is allow us to plan out the work, smooth out that work, but also smooth out and be able to plan out the funding for that, so that from a customer perspective, we can also balance that affordability and have a plan that will work over time without a lot of peaks along the way. Ultimately, it has improved and will continue to improve safety, reliability of our systems, and it also positions our communities for growth, having those robust systems, not just in electric, but all of them. Just some examples, kind of looking under the hood of Century 2 Electric, you'll find some key system investments in there. We invest about $10 million a year for substations, and another $10 million for those sub-transmission lines that connect those. And we've been adding, as we've been rebuilding those since 2007, adding fiber optic cable. I've actually got a slide on that next, and I'll kind of use that as an example. As far as a maintenance expense, just an example of that, spend about $14 million annually for vegetation management. And that's about a 4-year cycle through our system. Some areas are closer to 3 years, some may be closer to 5. We really have that determined based on our foresters and what they recommend to keep our systems safe and reliable. That's important because the number one cause of outages, I'm sure you've heard, is trees, and certainly was the main focus of the winter storms we had here recently. So that's very important. There are a lot of proactive inspection and maintenance programs we have in place. For example, we do infrared thermography, which is temperature readings on equipment to find hot spots so we can identify equipment that needs to be maintained or replaced. A lot of really neat stuff. Again, I wish I could go into a lot more detail today, but I'm going to be respectful of your all's time and move on. This is the map example, again, another map, but just kind of showing the progress we've made through Century 2 of upgrading our substations and upgrading our transmission lines. From a substation perspective, those are the colored circles you see on the map, and they have some different significance based on the colors, and I won't bore you with the details of that. The clear circles are the ones with no color on the background. Those are to be done, and in our long-range plan to be done that. We're about 50% complete with those. And when I say 50% complete when it comes to Century 2, that's really just an abstract marker in time, because Century 2 is really perpetual. That sustainable process and that sustainable way in which we plan things really never stops. We have to continue to invest and continue to do on that so that it lasts into the future. On the sub-transmission side, and this is really kind of gets to some of the foundational elements that allows us and puts us in a position to talk about municipal broadband. Since 2007, we've rebuilt about half of our transmission lines. And as we did that, we upgraded our communications that we already had in place with fiber optic cable. And that's important because allowing us to have high-speed communication between our substations and back to our operations center is really critical to us being able to leverage some operational benefits and some technology so that we can be able to sense things that are going out on the system more quickly, respond to those more quickly, and in many cases, allow the technology and the systems to safely be able to self-heal and automate some reliability and some restoration on its own. So having that fiber in place certainly helps our electric system and all of our systems, and it's one important piece as we move forward. I mentioned Century 2 is a perpetual program, things that are going on. our customer needs continue to evolve. So as we're balancing safety, reliability, affordability, and making sure that we're moving forward, we also have to recognize that those customer needs are changing, whether it's a large data center that's wanting to locate in our area, or whether it's a student who's learning virtually from home right now because of COVID. All the different needs that are out there continue to evolve. We've got to be mindful of those and stay ahead of that. So having invested in our system and having reliable systems is critical for that, to allow people to continue to live their lives uninterrupted for the most part. And again, putting fiber out there in the systems then allows us to connect that, put some smart devices out there, even at the distribution level. So when things happen that are unexpected, whether it's a tree falling through a line, a motor vehicle accident that takes out a pole, those systems can communicate back, reroute power, isolate or narrow down the number of customers that are impacted by that. And that's just an example of ways in which we're going to leverage Century 2 and technology moving forward. I've already touched on advanced meters and how that's also there. One of the things we hear a lot from our customers is it's not only important for us to have ways in which to get their power restored more quickly, but they want to know about it. They want us to communicate with them. And so that's one of the things that we do as well through our meters, through a new web app or a new mobile app that you'll hear about. All those things is ways in which we could communicate better with them as well. And really my last kind of content slide, earlier on I mentioned the American Society of Civil Engineers. Number one thing was you got to start with investing in those systems. And by nature, those investments are pretty significant. Good news for us, I think we started much earlier than most. We've got a sustainable and I think rather smooth long-range plan for each system. But we thought it'd be helpful just to kind of give you an idea of I threw out some numbers earlier on, but just to kind of put it in perspective of a high-level view of our annual electric budget, and even how that even translates down to the customer bill. So again, these are very high-level numbers. And frankly, they've been simplified, much like the rest of my presentation, just for speed and delivery. But as you look at that $600 million electric budget that we have in our current fiscal year, those are just the big components that make that up. So you can see right off the bat that 70% or $413 million goes directly to TVA to pay for electricity. And then when you look at the next two categories, our capital and our operating and maintenance expenses, that's about $143 million that allows us to invest in that system maintenance and making sure we have systems in place to deliver reliable electricity to our customers. We also have things we probably all recognize from our own personal lives, debt and taxes. From a debt perspective, we borrow money and finance through bond issuances to make sure that helps offset some of the cost to our customers on a near-term basis. And so about $25 million annually helps pay that back over time, just like we have to pay mortgages and car payments. And we also pay in lieu of tax payments, which are very similar to property taxes, as well to the jurisdictions in which we have assets. So that's kind of a high level. And then when you walk it across to the customer bill, that's just kind of a proportional representation of that as well. So you can see those things and how they impact. So again, overall, I hope that my intention was to go very fast, and I think I did that. At least as much as I'm capable of. I hope that does help, and I'm glad to answer any questions that you all may have about the electric system.
Do we just go and ask, or do you want to, Bill?
I think for now, if you can unmute yourself and just ask, sort of like you just did, that probably works as well as anything.
Great, John. Thank you for the presentation and the high level inch deep. Made a couple of quick questions. So, can you quickly explain the 90K, the 69 kV lines, the upgrading? One in particular is the upgrade. It's to carry fiber. Is that the primary objective in the upgrade, besides the fact that it just might wear out and lose connectivity?
No, the real fundamental reason is just the poles and the wire just gets old, mostly the poles. So those are built, wood poles, last about 50 years, some more than others and some less than others. It depends on the environment they're at. But no, it really began with us, recognizing we had poles that need to be replaced. And we began, more information you want to know, but just kind of show the evolution of thought and process along the way. But we originally replaced single poles that were those that were the closest to failure. And then over time that evolved to more holistic planning and replacing circuits. And when we get into that circuit replacement, that's when we were able to bring in fiber and other things. So as we do that, we upgraded, future-proofed, added capacity a lot of times in the wire size so that we could support future growth in those areas, do a better job of linking things together. Good question.
I would like to say, Vivian had a question for John. Vivian, would you like to, I could read that, or would you like to go ahead and jump in and ask about the whether we'll need poles?
You can go ahead. You've seen it. You can go ahead and share.
Sure. Vivian, will we ever see a time when we won't need poles? And what determines when lines can be underground?
Oh, we could spend hours and days on that topic. We're asked that a lot. Poles aren't pretty. I'll kind of give you the quickest definition of it as I can. It's a lot more expensive to put it underground. I'll start there. And so from an affordability perspective, when you look at that, it certainly changes the equation quite a bit. The other thing to keep in mind is we have a lot of attachers on our poles. So a lot of communications, AT&T, Comcast, WOW, others attach their assets to our poles. So even if we went underground, they would have to also make the decision to go underground and bear that in their rates. And oftentimes that becomes difficult as well. So what you'll see a lot of times is in newer areas that are developer installed, subdivisions, new commercial, retail centers, they'll make the decision to put things underground and bear the cost for that, so that our customers as a whole don't have to for aesthetic purposes. I will say, having the responsibility and the pleasure of managing our construction group, it is easier to maintain, inspect, see things up in the air, not as pretty, for sure. We're mindful of that. And honestly, and there's certain areas where, from a reliability perspective, there's been times where we've taken on that responsibility of putting lines underground, but it's really only if the cost of maintaining them is greater. So it is a cost thing and affordability thing oftentimes.
Right. Vivian had one other follow-up about, I know, you mentioned the attachment from the carriers like AT&T and Comcast. And I know this is a very complex subject matter just from my past life, but could you speak to the charging them to attach and what the obligations are having to do with their attaching when you work with them, and also she wanted to know whether solar will ever allow there to be fewer poles.
Yeah, I think I'll start with the attachers. Yes, we do charge them a rate to attach to the poles. That's something that's very commonplace and negotiated, and usually on we have people that want to attach 5G an attachment. They also want to attach just across an entire area. So we have ways in which we do that and manage that process. And honestly, if you see extra poles out there on the system, you'll see a new pole replaced and then an old pole behind it that stays there for a long time. We get that question a lot. That's just the process of trying to get the others who are attaching to move over. It's a difficult, time-consuming process, frustrating to the communities that have those eyesores out there. We work with them as much as we can to some degree. It is difficult at times, but we do attach to that. As far as solar changing the number of poles, really the poles are a function of holding up the wire. And so it's really just an engineering equation to make sure we've got the right, structure in place to hold up whatever it's supporting. And when we size those poles, again, it's more than just the electrical lines. When we size poles, we also have to take into consideration the needs of the other attachers as well. We put those in place.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else have any questions for John?
This is Kent Minow here. I got a question about broadband for you, John. You mentioned that you've installed a lot of broadband to communicate both with your own electrical infrastructure and with customers' meters. What will happen if there's a decision to provide broadband as a public service? and this is something that a lot of our allies in rural areas are interested in. Are you part of the way there? Or if it were provided as a service to customers, would you have to install a whole new set of fiber optics?
I think that will be best answered as part of Jamie's presentation. I think he's actually going to touch on quite a bit of that as he goes through that. So if it's okay, Ken, I'll let him do that through his presentation. If that's still unanswered, then he can hit on that at the end. He's actually more qualified to answer that than me anyway.
All right.
So that one's coming.
Yes. Hey, John, this is Tiki Dixon.
Yes, sir.
You did a very good job based on also on your time constraints. So thank you very much. Now you put up a money slide. So here's your question. Often you see things that drive up rates. Is there area of time variables that will drive down rates to the customer?
You know, that's a difficult question for me to ask. I know we're going to have some other sessions in the future really about rates and how we go about rate making and our budgets and our plans. And so I don't want to dodge your question. At the same time, I'm probably not the one best prepared to answer that either. You know, short answer, whether it's new houses or new cars or other things that are out there, most things that come out aren't less expensive. But you know, one thing I will say, we take great time and effort into trying to find ways of doing what we do better and cheaper. And at the same time, you know, making sure we deliver a quality, reliable service to our customers. So it's always part of that equation. You know, affordability, probably now more than ever, is on our minds and something we think about with every decision that we make. So it's very important to us, but there's no doubt that it's, you know, running a utility system, whether it's electric, gas, water, wastewater, whatever it is, at times is a costly proposition. But we do our best to try to balance those things for our customers.
Good answer. Okay, thank you.
Any others before we move on to broadband? We'll be able to ask questions, obviously, about both together after that second presentation as well. But let's be sure we clarify anything on the on electric system.
Looks like Aaron had a question in there, and since I'm speaking, one quick question is that the capacity added substations. So that makes sense that you can have more capacity going through the grid, and so there. Kind of two little things in there. It doesn't matter to have the upgraded lines daisy chained with the ones that aren't upgraded. Does that pose a risk to the efficiency and therefore cost to the consumer, to the resident? And then do the capacity added substations also just make it more reliable? Are we seeing efficiency gains and sort of things like that?
So when we talk capacity, you know, there's really a couple of ways to dice that one up. So one is customer growth. You know, most areas within our service area are growing, and so we want to make sure we stay ahead of that. And we do that when we go ahead and we have to have a project to upgrade or to replace. We might as well go ahead and upsize slightly to support that future growth. And so we always look at that. Now it's not an automatic. We don't automatically upgrade, but we think through it to make sure that's a good thing. The other part of capacity is related to system maintenance. So we have to make sure we have the capacity that if we need to take a line down or a substation down to do maintenance, we have the capacity to support those other growing areas as well. So there's a lot that goes into it. And interestingly, you asked that. So, you know, one of the things that we have to be mindful of, and some of the reasons why there are, you remember back to the map that we had the purple sub-transmission lines and the black ones that hadn't been done yet. You know, some of the reasons that we order those is to avoid that whole issue where you've got capacity constraints along the way. So you have to be able to kind of do that smartly so that we upgrade lines that make a difference and can help us and avoid those that would kind of be non-value added for a period of time. So that all goes into that equation, that long range planning we look at, and is part of it as well.
Okay. And it's because he mentioned Aaron has a question or comment to make as well.
It was just for the chat, but I was just saying it's, you know, the stakes are high when it comes to this infrastructure, both for electrical and the other systems. And, you know, I know it's easy to defer maintenance, but you guys are not doing that. And as a customer, I can really appreciate that you're taking such a proactive approach.
Right. I might add that some communities have deferred maintenance, and that ends up being quite a heavy price to pay later. So I'm glad you made that point. Any others before we move to broadband? Thanks so much, John. Jamie, why don't we turn it over to you to bring the broadband presentation?
All right, I'm glad to do that. As I'm doing that, I'll ask to be sure that I too am figuring out the technology here, and you can see my screen in just a second. And can you see that now or not? Let me try again. Screen one, share. All right, are you seeing the slide there?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes, I see it.
All right. I will only give you a little bit of my biography so that I can show a little credibility in answering a couple questions that were asked as part of John's. I've worked at KUB a long time, and part of my life was spent in the finance and rate side. And so to the question about bills going down, obviously we look for, as John said, ways to save cost. And so a lot of times it may not show up that the rates went down, but that rate increases were deferred. And so it's almost like a silent rate moratorium, very similar to what we've done here recently in acknowledgement of the pandemic and things like that. So I would point to that. But I'd also point to our fuel cost changes in theory monthly. And so at times that automatically, those savings are passed along through the bill, as you saw that very large bar from TVA, very well may be that the power cost is cheaper to our customers. So hard to spot sometimes with their usage fluctuating and everything else too. But that's some ways that you would indeed see through that. So, but at any rate, and I'll also go ahead and address Kent's question right off the bat too. Our meters actually don't talk on the fiber that we have today. And the reason that is because it's wireless. We have a number of towers throughout our system, and through radio signal, a licensed RF signal, we communicate with those towers, and the fiber that we have in place connect to those towers. So to the question about the fiber and the 69 lines, it's a static line that's required there for grounding, and some real smart people, some engineers back in the day figured out how to put fiber through the middle of that. And so when we upgraded our lines, we said, let's go ahead and put that fiber there and replace our old analog circuits in that regard. And that's really proving out a lot of benefits. And John, and I'll touch on it again and again, a map I have, that we've got about 150 miles of that out on our system. So at any rate, wanted to touch on those questions. And if I didn't answer both of those appropriately, y'all can tag me here at the end. It really was important as we do launch into broadband, and I'm really excited to be here to talk about broadband. It's something that we've been researching now for quite a while, and really excited to kind of share some of the information with you all tonight. But it really does have a very strong relationship to the electric division, and as such, John's really set me up well. That in grid modernization, which is just a really fancy way of saying that there's a lot of great technology that has emerged, let's say in the last 10 to 15 years, that with the right communication systems, we can really advance how we run an electric system to really improve reliability, safety, and redundancy. And so that's a little bit of that enabling fiber technology, then also positions a utility to be able to do broadband. We'll jump into that. So let me see if I can advance my slide here. So as we jump into this, let's just start with a little bit of a level set, is that municipal broadband in our world, we kind of deem it, the triple play package that you would expect, high-speed internet service, TV packages that could go along with that, and also phone service. And so that's pretty straightforward, but we also think it's a business model. And why is that? Well, there's just some unique characteristics in municipal broadband different than, let's say, our for-profit providers. One, it is built on 100% fiber to home. Kent pointed out that a lot of folks have fiber to home for their advanced meters in some communities. But when doing a fiber to home model, that's one thing that has really positioned folks to do broadband, both for metering applications and other applications all the way down to the home. That fiber is almost unlimited speed and reliability. It's a great medium. It's been around a while. It really is only limited by the electronics that you put on either end of it. That is unique in the fact that a lot of, again, for-profit providers don't. We have a few, there's some in our service territory, AT&T, maybe some Frontier and TDS that are doing that, but their whole systems aren't based upon that. Municipal broadband really is probably as far as a serving everyone component, is very similar to when TVA brought power to the Valley. Many of the municipals don't cherry pick high density areas or high profitability areas. there's really an obligation there to serve everyone and put everybody on a level playing field in that regard. And state law is what governs municipals to be able to be in this space. And as such, it's limited by your electric service territory. So folks that are in this space, you can't go outside of that boundary. And as such, each locality kind of gets to deliver that unique solution for that unique area. It's a homegrown local solution, meaning the folks working on that system, serving that system, answering the phones on that system are indeed local, and really owned by the ratepayers in that particular regard. On the map on the right does reflect what John talked about earlier. Those little dots on that map are our electric substations. We're about halfway through our 10-year plan to connect those dots. On the screen there, you can see where the green lines have gone. It's about 150 miles of fiber that we have out on the system. When we're complete, it'll be about 300 miles. And I mentioned that specifically because if we were to do a fiber to home solution, that'd be about 5,000 miles. So you get the economy of scale of, even though we can create the interstate, if you will, by connecting our substations with 300 miles, if we took it down to the home, that'd be about 5,000 miles. And that really is evident when you see kind of the price tag of our estimates of what a model like this would cost. So who's doing this? I've done a number of these looks on a map for a number of years now, and I would submit to you this map has been a lot less green over the years than it sits today. And green being that these municipals are in some form or fashion in some phase of deploying broadband in their communities. Orange being where KUB has been for years, where we said this is not a space that we want to be in. We feel like the for-profit providers have committed to expand in our area, provide faster speeds, stable prices, so forth. We thought that as we built that, I'll call it interstate backbone, that they would want to partner and be on that and then serve our area. To this day, that really hasn't happened. They haven't expanded into some of the areas that you know that don't have reliable service or fast enough speeds. They really haven't knocked on our door to partner with us. And as such, that kind of changes us to take a look at. And as you all know, Mayor Kincannon, as part of her campaign platform, said, I'd really like KUB to take another look at this. So Gabe Bolus, our CEO, said, we'll do that. And thus our research kind of began a year or so ago to take another dive into this. And so that's the reason we're blue on that map. Gray communities there just really don't have a public posture. They really haven't said they're getting into it or not. But again, I would submit to you folks in the gray phase are probably more blue, kind of waiting to see what communities are doing, is because you can see that across the state, it's no longer kind of those pioneer communities of Chattanooga and Morristown that have kind of gotten into it. There's a lot of folks in this space. So the next question is, say, well, why the change? Why are utilities doing this? And this is a slide that, much like some of John's slides, that I could park on and talk all night. But again, respectful that you've got a life a lot more exciting than talking about utilities and broadband. We'll hit it quick. But one of the big things that we see is that the devices that do indeed connect via fiber and for self-healing circuits really can make an impact in electric reliability. I make the statement that we can't cut enough trees to improve reliability at KUB based upon where we live. But there are devices, and we'll generically call them smart switches, that utilities have really kind of put out in large form over the last, say, 10 years that are making a difference. We have piloted that technology on some of our circuits. We've seen a big improvement. Chattanooga would tell you they've seen on average about a 40% improvement in reliability. And from a customer satisfaction perspective, I don't know about you, but I like my lights being on. From that aspect, that can be a meaningful benefit to the consumer or a business to be in power. We can't reduce the frequency of outages, but we can reduce the impacts with these switches. It goes through into self-healing. It'll automatically backfeed. It'll keep, I always use an example of a feeder with 1,500 customers. If there was a switch in the middle of that line and a tree falls, it might knock out half that line, but the other half of customers would still be on. And that's just a real rudimentary example. The cool thing with a lot of these technologies, there are operational benefits. There's I call them financial benefits, if you will, or customer satisfaction benefits, but these applications that are now being provided also provide environmental benefits. There's great demonstrations of conservation voltage reduction on electric systems. If you have fiber and advanced meters and other technologies on the systems, you're really able to partner up those applications and know how to best efficiently run your system. At the end of the day, that's less electrons on the line meant to pump up voltage on our system. We run it more efficiently. Ultimately, that's a win-win-win from an operational, a financial, and an environmental perspective. And those technologies have really been demonstrated quite well over the last 10 years. Economic development has really taken a big boom in the areas in which broadband has been applied. And you can understand in rural areas where they didn't have any service per se, but especially there was a study lately, and we can pass this along to you all, about the Times Free Press had just recently published a survey done by the University of Tennessee, Chattanooga, about the 10-year impact of broadband in the Chattanooga community. And I want you to be sure you hear this number because it's huge. I feel like I'm, and from Austin Powers was at $2.7 billion worth of impact in the last 10 years in the Chattanooga area. Over 9,500 jobs added because of their broadband system. So if you think about the extreme cost of that network, there's also an upside benefit beyond just the utility operations and having great broadband that communities are seeing inside of their area because of broadband. In talking with the Chattanooga, I'll say EPB, and let me put this on notice. Now, EPB is the equivalent of KUB from Chattanooga, so don't let me get my acronyms out there and you don't know what I'm talking about. But the Chattanooga folks, as I talked to them, I would say, what chicken or egg? Was it broadband that brought Volkswagen to town, or was it Volkswagen that helped you all invest in broadband? And at the end of the day, they would tell you they feel like that their fiber and their brand of Chattanooga, if you will, really has been enhanced by the broadband, and such really kind of drove some of that economic development. At the end of the day, there's really a couple of things that we really feel like that municipal broadband utilities are having to step in this place, because again, community needs in a lot of cases are simply not being met by private sector. It's expensive to invest in. Sometimes profit motivations don't allow them to go to areas where the density is not there, or whether they don't have those operational benefits on an electric system like a municipal utility does. And so as a result, sometimes folks are stranded. You hear about this digital divide, and we see that even in our own community. At the end of the day, our perspective is municipal broadband ultimately provides a superior product that's available to all. And when we do a product comparison, I like to show this when I talk to folks about our research, is I just use a representative kind of package here. And again, there's a lot of packages out there, and a lot of them move and change because of sometimes that's one criticism of for-profit is the transparency. But the Xfinity package there that you see, the 300 megabyte package, that's what I have in my house. At the end of the day, that's a pretty robust package. 300 megabytes download speed's pretty solid in that regard. It probably represents one of the faster speeds that Comcast Xfinity will offer in our area. You'll notice right out the gate, download speed's 300, but the upload speed's 20. And really that hadn't been a big issue. And most of us on this call would say, well, not unless we're doing stuff like this, or our kids are in virtual school or whatever else. We've seen our own videos freeze up online, or we're pushing stuff up to the cloud. I heard a news report on WBR this week of a teacher here locally who was complaining that it took her 5 hours to upload her lesson plan to Canvas. And I suspect that many thought, well, that darned old Canvas system, I bet it's no good. I suspect it was probably her internet service at her house. It was probably a significant data load to push up, and probably whatever service she had, it really just couldn't be matched by the upload speed there. You can't use all you want in many cases of our for-profit providers. If you look on that data cap line, Comcast will cap me at 1 terabyte. Years ago, you would have never touched that, but as folks stream, do virtual homeschooling, working from home, I joke and use Gabe's family of professionals at home working at times, and 2 boys doing Netflix and Xbox and everything else. I think he burns through that terabyte in about half the month. So he has to pay a little bit extra for unlimited in that regard. But and you'll see there the Xfinity offers the gig in Knoxville. It's not widely available, and you can kind of see the corresponding speeds there. But if you take a look at Chattanooga, their entry level is a 300 megabyte package. You'll notice the first key distinction, and I'll use this word, and it's becoming one of my favorite words, is symmetrical. You'll see that both in the upload and download speeds, they are equal. So you kind of remove that barrier that we talked about pushing stuff up to the cloud, or these Zoom videos and things like that really becomes a much more superior product. And then from a data cap perspective, it's unlimited. So just from a quality of product perspective, I think that's some pretty good indicators that municipal broadband really does provide a superior product. And in a lot of cases, it's because it's, again, on that fiber all the way to the home network. Now, from a cost perspective, we want to look at value too, and the value that municipal broadband may provide. it's great that you may be fast, but if you can't do it at the best possible value, not necessarily the cheapest, but a good value, then the investment may not be worth it to carry out that service. But if I pay right now at Comcast $86 a month. That's with a $10 discount for auto pay and paperless. So maybe 96 if you don't do those things. You compare that package to Chattanooga at 58. It's $57.99. You go on their website right now, and it hadn't changed in years. That's really been the rate. And then for $10 more a month, you get the gig in Chattanooga. And everybody's kind of heard them called Gig City. So I think a lot of folks really like the gig in Chattanooga in that regard. So, so from our perspective, again, superior product at the best possible price at a good value, and potentially, if prices were constant, in many cases, a good value, and maybe even a little bit of extra money in your pocket. So as we've talked to some of our stakeholders about their thoughts, we've spoken with both of our mayors, and they are very supportive of the notion of us looking at this. And again, the research, they kind of agree with us what they're seeing. I'll tell you who really has supported this, and I think maybe some representatives of these counties may be on the call tonight, and they can voice their thoughts on this. But in the rural areas, we've received a lot of support. Mayor Bailey from Union County has really said, please, please, please consider this. And I believe even Granger County's commission passed a resolution saying, KUB, will you please do this? So again, rural areas are what we are seeing, and where these speeds, what I would call modern speeds, are just not available on a widespread basis, and for sure not at a reasonable price. The lab is very interested in regional broadband. Dr. Zachariah at the lab commissioned an East Tennessee Broadband Summit during the pandemic. He realized that his staff at the lab, having to be working from home during the pandemic, realized it was a real impact to that staff of what they could or couldn't do in the office, and really kind of was an eye-opener for really folks in our entire area, that indeed, whether it be a virtual school or for telehealth or telemedicine, virtual learning, there really are some gaps in our area. And so the lab is really kind of entered into this discussion. But we wanted to hear from our customers. And so some of you may recall or have heard that we did a purchase intent survey. It's a statistical survey where we selected 400 random KUB customers. We had a firm help us out with this. And really that survey just said, how do you feel about your current service? How would you feel about KUB being in this space? And there were really three key indicators, or three key, I guess you'd say touch points coming out of that particular survey. One, the pandemic really has sped this up, but for sure, folks really desire high speed and high reliability service. No longer is it just for entertainment, it's for all those other, kind of necessities of life that folks really believe have become a necessity with high-speed broadband. And in many cases, some of you can use the term, we believe it's become a utility. And in many cases, that indeed, I think that assessment is correct. When asked, would you be interested in KUB providing this service, over 80% of the respondees of the survey said there was significant interest in KUB getting into this business. I think the key point there is, at the time we took the survey, we had nothing to share with them about products that we may offer or what price. And so with no products and no price, we still had nearly 80% of the respondees say that they would be interested in KUB providing service. And then when asked, how do you feel about your current provider, and then especially compared to KUB, there were higher ratings for KUB than the current incumbent providers. And if you look at the chart there on the screen, the folks that understand the science behind these numbers tell me that anywhere around 7 says, I feel pretty good about the product, but I'm not necessarily loyal to the brand. And if you take a look down there at us on our existing services for water and energy services, we received over 8 and 8.3 on a 10-point scale rather. And what they tell us there is anything over 8 says that not only do I feel good about what you're doing, but I'm pretty loyal to you as a brand. Well, what's important about that? Well, obviously, if we get into this business, it's going to be a competitive environment, and we need to be able to compete and move market share to KUB in order to be profitable, or at least maybe viable, if you will. And we believe that those ratings kind of show that there's some inertia there and interest in KUB getting into the business. So if we were to get into the business, what does it look like? We'd have to create a 5th utility. That process is governed by state law. Our board plays a role. TVA plays a role because there's a strong linkage to the electric division, because the electric division would ultimately support the purchase of the assets of the fiber, and then fiber would pay its fair share on those assets back to electric. The creation of that 5th utility also requires city council to approve us getting into that space, and as well as an opportunity for our customers to give us their thoughts and opinions on doing so. And all that's codified in state law. And we talk a lot more about that, but I'll keep moving. Our estimates still show, though, that it's a very expensive proposition. It's about $500 million, $500 million over the first 10 years of getting into this system, about $400 million in capital. Again, I told you that we'd have to put in about 5,000 miles of fiber, and that can indeed be an expensive proposition. As with all of our projects, much like what John mentioned, we would be looking at to finance that through rates, a balance of rates and debt. A lot of folks want to say, you know, over the years when we do this, can you borrow your way through it? Well, we can't. It's just like, you know, buying a home. There has to be a balance between, you know, using your credit card and using your paycheck, so to speak. And so there would have to be a balance in that. From a staffing and facilities perspective, I mentioned that, you know, Chattanooga really felt like there was 9,500 jobs added in the community, but specifically at KUB, as far as employees that would ultimately be KUB employees to do this, it'd be about 200 new KUB jobs. So good job growth for the area, good local jobs. I've said, you know, with another set of books, we probably need another accountant. With another truck or two, we probably need another mechanic. But we'd also need folks like fiber splicers, network engineers, electronic engineers, folks that we don't have today on staff. So we're excited when we hear about ETAC here locally has a fiber splicing certification program, things like that. Again, good job growth for the community, for folks that would live in this area. The next question everybody says, well, when can I get it? And we think it'd take about a 7-year build out to do it. Most communities that do this, they serve as they go. So as you pass customers, as we would deliver the fiber, then you would light customers on the way to there. That positions us not only to do, again, you know, fiber, but other utility side applications. It future proofs our next advanced meter decision. Right now we use that wireless vendor. The next time with fiber, it kind of opens up a new world for us in that regard. So, you know, I call it kind of a win-win-win in that particular regard. Again, a great utility operation perspectives, efficiencies, and reliability enhancements, as well as that enabling technology is really what lays the groundwork for you to be able to carry out and have broadband service for your community. So as far as timeline that we're on right now, again, for those that have heard us talking to our board, we continue to update them and talk with them here in the first quarter of this year. We think that we may be back this spring to talk to them about the opportunity to submit our business plans that we were developing and submit those to TVA and the comptroller sometime this spring. Would really love to be able to get together with folks and seek their input in public, but if not, we'll find a unique way to do that via virtual means to hear their thoughts and especially be sure that we consider their inputs as we get into this business or not. And then hopefully then be back to our board and council sometime later this year for final approvals, if indeed we move along at every step. And then in 2022, hopefully sometime that calendar year, our goal would be maybe late in the year, hopefully to light that first customer perhaps. That'd be an aggressive goal, but that's again, our best estimate of what could happen on that particular timeline. So I will say though, in ending, you know, it's one of these things that KUB is really in the position to be able to do this. And we understand though that there are business partners and there are entities in the area that really want to see this. And so community support is absolutely critical. It's not necessarily something KUB has to do, but we understand that as you look across the state and otherwise, it's usually the utility that ends up in this space. And we really do believe through our research and through input from our customers and other stakeholders that they really do believe that our future does rely on high-speed, reliable broadband in that particular regard. So I've shot through like a cannon. I know y'all have drunk out of a water hose here, and I look forward to the questions that you may have in that regard, and I look forward to answering them. So with that, I'll stop sharing my screen and see if anybody's put anything up in the chat or.
Well, David, you seem to have unmuted yourself there. Do you have one you'd like to ask or comment?
No, not this time. Thank you.
Okay.
I've got a question. Jamie, really good job. And it sparks a lot of thought here. One, how does your competitors feel about you getting into this space? Because they're going to want to know about it. And why not just buy your way into the space of existing companies, et cetera?
Well, I think that one, the easiest question to answer is what do they think about it? They're not going to like it a bit. So that's very easy, and I am absolutely certain in that regard. That'd be the most truth I've told you tonight. I think that as far as acquiring other systems, it's an interesting thought. I think the distinction there would be is those, like I said, a lot of them don't have fiber to home. And so we very well may, let's pretend that I haven't even thought of it in this regard, but let's pretend we could. Let's pretend Comcast would sell us their system. What the medium that they have to home, then I'd only be able to sell cable. I wouldn't be able to provide the speeds that municipal broadband is kind of positioned to do. And I really lose that I call it that utility side benefit. I don't get that win-win-win in that particular regard. So I would tell you that I think the business model, the value proposition really starts to kind of fall apart in that regard. It really isn't just about providing broadband. Again, the real value proposition is what you can do from a grid modernization perspective and the utility side applications. And then if you will, that fiber's there. And that's the reason municipals have said, well, we can jump in here and provide broadband now because we've got that fiber to home. But great question. I hadn't thought about buying anybody. So.
Vivian had one about what we can be done about gathering community support now.
Great question. I think that as we continue to, I think we want to have many opportunities for folks to share their opinion about this. And so I definitely know that when we derive opportunities for folks to give feedback, we'll want to use this body to be able to get the word out on that, about their thoughts and importance in that regard. Because again, if our community doesn't want us to do this, we shouldn't be doing it. It's just too expensive in that particular regard. So great question. And I know your number, Vivian, so I'll give you a call.
Yeah, Bill, I have a question. This is Steve. Jamie, great presentation. We had the good fortune to go down and tour EPB's operation a number of years ago, and it is just outstanding. And there are a couple of things that I just want to share from our tour down there that just sort of reinforce some of the things you're saying. First of all, one of the hidden benefits when you have a self-healing grid, it means that you're not rolling trucks as much. You're not putting people out. There's both, like you mentioned, the time savings, but there's also an environmental savings when you're not having to roll those diesel trucks out and put people out there in the middle of the night and everything, and the system heals itself. And you guys are already working on that. But that the guys at EPB really emphasize that as just being a phenomenal, and they were giving some of the statistics about just the snap to that happens when you can have these self-healing networks. The other thing, I think it's critically important, and COVID has obviously done this, but internet broadband in particular is becoming a critical commodity. And I think it is absolutely appropriate for the municipal utilities to get involved in this space. And I don't think that, any of the existing private providers can hold a candle to what can be done if you guys really put your mind to it. And so, we are very, very strong supporters of where you're going. And just one final example, they were sharing with us an example where in Chattanooga, a smaller high school, low income kind of part of town, was able to use the fiber and gain access to a scanning electron microscope in California. Ooh. So that their kids could have the experience in that high school of having access to that kind of high quality equipment. And I think the educational, and I mean, these kind of things just compound. So this should be an absolute, in my opinion, absolute no-brainer for our community. And, I say, man, pedal to the metal and let's get this thing done as fast as possible, because there's just a cascading set of benefits that come to having it happen. And I know, again, some of the private guys are going to raise hell about it, but I just think you just got to go and do the right thing. And we've done it before with private power when they wouldn't provide the same level of service. So I'd say go for it.
Well, thank you very much. I want to just add one thing. I think we probably didn't stress enough that this is the goal and the ability to achieve near universal access in all areas, not just depend on where a private provider might sense they would repay their investment and have that limit where it goes. I mean, that's a whole different ballgame when we're talking about a municipal utility and a municipal approach.
Yeah, I really appreciate Dr. Smith bringing up the notion of the truck rolls, because that was one of, even when we applied for our stimulus grant on our meters, that was one of our business cases, was that, how many tons of carbon we would keep off from our meter reading stuff. So yeah, I mean, there are so many environmental benefits that are just, they're almost byproducts, if you will, that you really don't think of because you're just sitting there thinking, great, my lights are still on. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. And then I was trying to read the chat too. Yeah, I think that the notion of, I think Dr. Viv, you said, the equity across the board is that it just the notion that it's available to all and it's such a high quality service. We're not giving out, we're not providing rather, the most menial service to those in areas. We get so many emails right now, from our even rural perspective, inner city perspective, where it's just not available. And they're like, please, please, please do this. So I appreciate your comment. So I was looking to see if there's anything else there in the chat.
I've got a question for you, Jamie. Hey, this is Amy Midas. Hey, thanks so much for that presentation. You actually cleared up quite a bit. I have Xfinity at home. I have the 1 gig plan, and I have these Eros. I'm only getting about 124 megabyte download speed. And I guess that is because of that fiber to home that you were talking about. Obviously, it makes a significant difference if you can get the fiber to your house versus just having it on the line. But I thought that I had heard that Chattanooga was able to, part of the stimulus for them getting broadband was that they received a grant to help with their installation of broadband. Is that true?
That is
correct. And then the other question I had is that on the map that you showed of the different counties of Tennessee, it looked like a lot of the communities that actually had broadband were more rural, smaller communities other than Chattanooga. Why is that?
Okay, let me take your first question first. Yes, Chattanooga received a wonderful $110 million grant as part of the Obama administration's American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. It was the same grant that we got for our smart grid program. Ours was much smaller. And as such, Chattanooga had really already made the decision to get in the business. What it did was it expedited them. They had almost, I won't say immediate funding, but they had quite a bit to kind of get them going in that regard. I will say of note that we keep our ear to the ground that perhaps the Biden administration would have a similar stimulus package. And I think we're positioned well with Concept to indeed to take a crack at that if it were to come forward. Dr. Zachariah, I mentioned with the lab, he actually has a white paper prepared for the region to potentially through Department of Energy to raise his hand and say, hey, we've got some ideas for shovel-ready products. So that's on the grant side. I think that the larger areas haven't in some regards because either the type, if you recall back to John's presentation where it talked about the density of rural versus non-rural, that if you look at Nashville, for instance, so let's talk about the big 4 cities of Nashville, Knoxville, Memphis, Chattanooga. Chattanooga's in, we're considering it. So Nashville, Memphis are the 2. Memphis tried it moons ago. I'm not very familiar with it, but for some reason it failed. And I would tell you it was in the early days of this. And so I'm not exactly sure why that didn't pull off in Memphis, but ultimately they sold and divested their system to a for-profit company. Nashville, I think they have a huge overlay, and you can imagine with all the boom in Nashville, huge overlay of competitors in that region. Plus they have Google Fiber. They've got about a 10% footprint there. And honestly, nobody wants to compete with Google and Amazon and things like that. So that is only Jamie's opinion. I can't tell you why NES, National Electric Service, really hasn't got in that. What I do know is very similar to a lot of the utilities, they're investing in those utility side applications. And so you may see them, ultimately tip the scale and decide to do it. Indeed, in the rural areas, there's just an absence. There's nobody, the for-profits aren't coming into that space. I use the example of I was in Winchester this summer at Timms Ford State Park, and I couldn't even get cell service. And so, what if you lived in that area? You truly are stranded from I think Dr. Smith, said, it's almost a given that you need it for telemedicine or telehealth. And I keep saying those like those are different. Telemedicine is telehealth, teleeducation rather, and telework. So I think the business proposition, the proverbial payback is not the rural areas, but it's almost become a requirement if those areas are going to have broadband. And you hear a lot of support for this notion of rural broadband as well. A lot of the grants from the state, a lot of the grants again from the federal government, FCC RDOF is an auction every year that they'll put out. A lot of that is for rural broadband. It's not necessarily for those urban environments. So they do get some seed money, I would say, is my suspicion as well too. So great questions.
Thank you.
Hey, Jamie, what do you think I know there's a lot of variables involved in the numbers to put this in place. What do you think the ROI will be? Actually,
Well, I don't know exactly, but I would tell you, again, I would point to Chattanooga as a good example. And I think the notion is, again, you've got those great upside economic benefits of the community. You've got stable prices. They have about 70% market share in their community. So 7 out of 10 customers that have broadband service are a Chattanooga EPB customer. So I think people like their product. So you got a happier community in that regard. But I would also tell you that they haven't had to raise their electric rates for a number of years now because of that symbiotic relationship, I'll call it, between fiber. So I think the ROI is hard to measure from just a pure business perspective because the value proposition is just bigger than the dollars. And I would say where you may see that the best is in the stability in the retail electric rates, perhaps. And then, again, just my opinion in that regard. So.
Let me break in one moment. I noticed we're technology, make sure we keep up with everything. Amy, you have your hand up. Was that for previous or?
Yeah, sorry, that was my previous question.
No, I appreciate you raising your hand. And, that's, there are many ways to jump in here, chat hand, or just jumping in, and jumping in's working pretty well.
I think Christina asked a question. I'll jump in here and see if I can catch up on the chat. How will we know? Actually, that survey, a lot of folks, when they go into this, that original survey is enough justification because it's statistically significant. I know it doesn't seem like 400, but again, the people that understand the science behind their survey say that those numbers were really strong for KUB in that regard. And that EPB actually told us that our numbers were just a little bit better than theirs when they went in the business as far as folks that desired service from Chattanooga. I don't want to let all my trade secrets out of the notion that our competitors may be out there listening. No, but we definitely want to hear from our customers. But it really has been this year-long process of talking to stakeholders, talking to elected officials, now talking to you, getting that pulse of what does the community think about this. We're going to continue that drumbeat and see what folks think. And then I have a goal of doing a couple more of those statistical surveys just to understand indeed, because again, it's just such a big proposition. I want to be sure this is something the community wants. But that's not the only detail there.
And this is Steve. I want to go back to your previous point because it was a point that the folks at EPB emphasized with us, and I don't think it gets harped on enough that the symbiotic relationship between the electrical and the broadband and the stability of the electrical rates in Chattanooga, and the fact that the whole system on the broadband is so profitable for them that they are they're just doing quite well. And again, once you get it built out, it just pumps money out of the system. And I know it takes a lot to get over that initial capital outlay, but I think that's got to be part of the messaging to the community, is that this ultimately becomes a very powerful symbiotic support for lower electrical rates too, or at least keeping rates stable.
Right. Well, each of you that continue to be passionate about this can be our ambassadors for this. I know a couple of folks, Dr. Viv, and a couple have said, what do you need us to do? I will be getting your all's numbers again, because I really do mean it. I know Gabe believes this, that if the community doesn't want this, then KUB shouldn't do this. And so again, community support is, I can't overstate how critical it is, but thank you for the insights there.
Let me jump in with a moderator, a privileged role. I'll create one and then use it. We were scheduled to do, a little survey using another instrument to help with the discussion, but it seems to me the discussion's going pretty well. So is there a general sense of continuing this? We have about 15 more minutes, which will be our hour and a half, which is all we wanted to take of everybody's time. And I have just a minute or two of announcements at the end, but I thought I'd stop and say, should we just continue with this, or rather than go into the other, anybody?
This is good.
Anybody sense, does anybody object to doing that? Let's put it that way.
This is good. It's working. This is good.
Yeah, it seems to be a nice, robust discussion. So let's just continue with the questions and then the talk. Haseeb's had his hand up for a bit.
Hey, so again, thank you for the great presentation. And I love how you guys are able to give presentations that are they work well with each other. and it's fantastic. That's a skill and talent. So question, so the whole deliver as you go is super fascinating. And what's really fascinating is how you describe the benefit or the challenges for, it's easier for rural counties to kind of deliver versus metropolitan, and the random and the density throughout the population. So one of the benefits it seems like we have is the high speed and the symmetry with the density of our population. It seems like a great selling point for the entire region, considering also that you have two major cities in the state of Tennessee who aren't doing this, Memphis and Nashville at the moment. So my question is, as a deliver as you go, how soon could we actually start delivering? And then I'm sure Mike Odom's on the call, chamber. We've got the mayor's office who's incredibly interested in this. That's a business relocation that's a huge marketing message that we can bring a lot more jobs and businesses and just fascinating industries. So how soon could we deliver to go?
I think that what we've seen, and talking again, I consider Chattanooga almost world experts in this regard, and working with them and other folks that know. I think an aggressive deal and I'll say to touch the entire system. John showed you the map. I think it's about 7 years to get to everywhere. Now, that doesn't mean that the first customer served in 7 years. It just means that if in the question that I can't believe y'all haven't asked, well, where are you going to go first? We don't know. So, but at the end of the day, it really is, again, on that utility balance scorecard. I mean, at the end of the day, we've got reliability concerns we need. We follow that rehab path of those 69 lines. So I think what you'll see is that it'll go in different ways. There'll be urban, there'll be rural, there'll be places that are underserved. There'll be places that have reliability needs. That's my suspicion. So there'll be a logical plan there, but somebody's going to be in year 7.
But I want to clarify. So what I'm getting to, I actually don't, particularly me, for this question, I don't really care about where it's going to go necessarily, but time to land, because it's going to take time to land those businesses to come and attract them to the region. And so when can we start that marketing message and sort of attract more businesses and opportunities?
Well, I think that at some point in time, that may be a Mike Odom question in that regard. Mike, I'm on the chamber board with Mike, and I know that he talks a lot about, he believes in regional broadband as in his path to prosperity plan. But I need to let me start hanging some fiber and get this business model approved.
Okay.
I can get ahead of my board.
So we don't know when it's going to be first delivered, but obviously sooner the better. So
yeah, we may want to pursue that some, but I want to respect the fact that Kent has his hand up as well as Stephen as well. So, got it.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. This is Kent, and I also wanted to just talk to Dr. Vivian Snipe too, because she's got some questions in chat that I think should be amplified. They're equity questions, and one of the questions that Hasib, you asked was, how soon will it have an impact on attracting business and bringing jobs? Dr. Snipe is asking a question is, how soon and what priority will be given to the most affected people who have been left behind in the past? And those are two different questions that will, if they're answered right, mandate two different responses. And there's a lot of questions that have been raised tonight by people on the panel that affect rates and the cost of utilities. And before we go, I just wanted to answer one. This is directed to you, Ticky Dixon, because you asked a question about what reduces rates. And actually, there is one thing that has been known to put a downward pressure on utility rates, and that is the adoption of electric vehicles. And that might seem counterintuitive, because if you're putting a new demand on the system, wouldn't that raise rates? And the answer is no. And I believe that Mike Bullen from KUB made this comment in a meeting, that most people who charge up electric vehicles, whether they're municipal or privately owned, charge them up late at night when there's excess capacity on the grid, which means the utility can provide that electricity more cheaply than the electricity provided at peak demand, so that the peak demand electricity can have a lower rate. Anyway, I just wanted to mention that, because there are things that lower utility rates, and that's one of them.
Okay. Thank you. And thank you, Vivian, for keeping that in the conversation as well. Stephen?
Yeah, so Jamie, I apologize if I missed this, but can you walk us through the critical path that is necessary for there to be an absolute go, no go decision on this happening? What's the actual steps? Where are the critical pinch points so that we actually understand exactly how this flows to a fully go decision?
I think part of it is our own research and getting comfortable with our financial plans. And then I think I'll just talk about that regulatory process, if you will. It's codified in state law that our board plays a role, obviously. They have to approve us to have the president and CEO submit our business plans to the state of Tennessee comptroller. The comptroller then has 60 days to review those plans, kind of give you not an up or down, but you've submitted them and we approve you proceeding kind of thing. They don't tell you if it's a good plan or bad plan. After that, if you decide to move forward, you are required per state law to have a public forum. I call it open mic night, in which only that topic is the topic, and they can come and our board listen to our community's thoughts about those plans. No sooner than 14 days after that public forum can our board then vote to send a request to city council to approve us being in the business. And then city council would hold a one reading referendum or one reading ordinance, if you will, I guess. Aaron Gill can chime in, correct my verbiage, that they would then vote. They have the ultimate say as our governing body. And that's, again, codified in state law. So that vote by city council would be for all of our electric service territory, even though there are a lot of folks that live outside the city of Knoxville. But as you all have learned that city of Knoxville is our governing jurisdiction. So that answer your questions, Dr. Smith?
So I obviously didn't, but it sounds like there's roughly a 90 to 120 day roll once you guys start the process to check all the boxes and
depending on meeting schedules and kind of that minimum, that might be, I'd say 120 might be like the best case in that particular regard. But we want to be logical and well thought out and getting into this, because again, big price tag in that particular regard. But again, we understand that again, the pandemic has really highlighted the urgency of trying to meet these goals, especially knowing that it'll take a while for us to build out. So.
Great.
I want to interrupt and say that Mike Odom's had his hand up and make sure we hear from him, the chamber.
Thanks. Just very quickly, because I know there was some discussion, about the business development, as well as I think Dr. Viv talked about, or at least put in the chat about where do we invest first. Let me say this. First of all, on the business development side, the minute we get the word go, we're going to start using this to our advantage. So we don't need the fiber built out and ready to start. We're going to start selling it, not dissimilar to the way that when Google Fiber did their gig promotion 10 years ago, those communities that got it started promoting it and using it to their advantage. I mean, the big lie at EPB is most people don't even hit the gig, but yet still market it and you leverage it to drive that, hey, we're a gig city. That's great, but probably 1/2 of 1% of your actual customers actually need a gig at any one time. For us, it's just as important, though, to make this investment in our area of our community of which we have not made those investments historically. Because if we're going to recruit these businesses, and actually for us, more importantly, help those businesses here expand, because our focus really is on the businesses that are here first, then the attraction piece. We need to make sure kiddos are educated, are trained, are ready to go. And so, we've worked not only as Jamie, as you mentioned, on our board and our executive committee, but KUB has been very important in our ENOX task force, which has a stated goal of 100% broadband accessibility. So whether you're in Mechanicsville or you're in Granger County, you have the ability to have reliable, affordable internet access. And so we don't see, yes, KUB is going to have to make a decision as to, do you put this in first or put that in first? But from our perspective, we can attract the businesses without the fiber being in the ground, not being in the ground, but being there first. So for us, we really want to see the kiddos be able to have those families have that access. Because right now we have about 7,000 KCS households who do not have internet access. That's unacceptable. So I hope that helps or just adds more confusion.
Thank you. Okay, any other questions right now? We're just about done with our time. I really want to be respectful of everybody's time. I guess we could hang around here for quite a while. And there's nothing, we don't want to be overly rigid on our meetings. I mean, we'll be able to revisit this in discussion at other times during other topics because we're right in the front end of the, of the process on this. So I know everybody will follow it, and the folks at KUB will definitely keep us up to date about how the process is going as to public awareness and hearing from folks, making sure that everybody gets to hear from the public on this, and equity questions are recognized, and all the things that we've talked about that come into play. So if there are none, I guess it's about time to close the meeting. I want to.
Can I ask one question? It's unrelated to the if we're through with the fiber.
I want to point out one more thing. We will be sending you all. So we've talked a lot about tonight. A lot of great questions. We will be sending you all. I'll call it a one-pager with some of these facts on it, so that you have it. So as you all get questions, as this starts boiling up. There's also an email address. I think it's broadbandfeedback@kub.org. If somebody says, I've just got to tell somebody how I feel about this, feel free to share that email address with them. But again, thank you all for your questions and input, and really appreciated the discussion tonight.
And I want to thank everybody on the panel for your close attention and all the great questions and using the chat facility and the hand raising. And I think I'll get a little better about recognizing that sooner. I make that commitment. Right now, KUB is continuing to work on the orientation videos for wastewater and water and gas. And the plan run for the March meeting is on KUB's pandemic response plans, and to start getting into discussion of programs that help low-income customers. I know that's a great interest of many on this panel, probably all on this panel as well. Also want to remind you that if you have any questions, you can email me and Elba with them, and then we'll make sure that gets into a discussion about how we conduct the panel. So,
Bill, can I bring up my point now?
Sure.
Before we close, I submitted a letter today to Bill and Gabe on behalf of our organization on a Federal Energy Regulatory Commission case that a number of local power companies similar to KUB have brought with the Tennessee Valley Authority about transmission access. This is a tremendously important case for all of us to be aware of, because it would give utilities within the TVA service territory the potential to have access to power outside of the TVA region directly. And Bill, I would ask that letter be circulated to the committee members, and that we try to carve out a few minutes in an upcoming meeting to discuss that. I think it's something that this committee needs to be aware of and track. I know it'll take a little bit of time. Gabe graciously responded to me today, and I understand that KUB is still developing their position on it, but they have intervened, we've intervened. But I think everybody on the advisory committee should get a little bit of awareness about it. So if I could ask that letter is shared with all the advisory committee members, and we try to carve a few minutes out in a future meeting, that would be great.
Sounds good. We'll do that. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, if there are no other comments, very much appreciates everybody's hanging in there for this amount of time. And I learned a tremendous amount, and learned both from the presentation and from all the questions and the discussion. So thanks to everybody. And if there's no objection, we'll declare the meeting adjourned.
Thanks, Bill.
Okay. Okay.
Thanks, Bill.
Bye-bye.
Good night, you all.
Keep it happy.
Good night.